Ladies and gentlemen, have we got a show for you tonight? As it's very apparent that of all the people to ask about dungeons, I am not your man. I am not your man. So, it's time to turn to the big brains and to get some discussion going on all those things you or I would not notice until 4 months into the expansion. Because we're not going to do in 4 months what these chaps will do in the space of 10 days. And they have proved that with the amount of time they have put into the beta. We are about to be joined by the big brains themselves. Say hello to our roundtable. Look at this! Hey, not done bad. We can. Look at him. JB is here. So we have got a roundtable here of these wonderful people, and we're going to go around and talk about all kinds of things Shadowlands related. I'm doing more of the hosting position here because these are the guys with all the knowledge. So I'll actually come to you first, and representing our DPSs. They have an echo now. Chris is all over it. Don't worry about it. It's probably coming from somewhere. You will figure it out using the power of science. What's been your favourite dungeon so far? Let's start with something simple, and I wanted to see how you guys fared with that.
Probably Mist of Eternal Scythe. Except for the last boss, which clearly has either too many mechanics or overtuned mechanics.
Best and worst? Both?
Worst, has probably Necrotic Wake. A dungeon has
Come on, we're all saying Plaguefall for worst dungeon. Like,
yeah. No. I have something in store for Plaguefall for you. There's some special sauce in there.
You just don't like tentacles, JB. That's why you don't like the dungeon.
True. The tentacles some of the tentacles are gone though at the start, Robin.
I meant the last boss mainly. I've seen JB there a few times. It's it's spicy, to say the least.
Yeah, this is what happens when Robin spends all day making his weak auras, and we were supposed to test this. This is all Robin's fault for our issues.
Sorry.
Hopefully that's a little bit better now. Robin, best and worst dungeon so far?
Worst Necrotic Wake, I have to say, because it's very linear, or whatever that word is. I feel like you don't really have a lot of to choose from. It's kind of, like Workshop. You're bound to play the same trash every time. Best one, I think Halls of Atonement. I really like that dungeon, even though it's a bit undertuned at the moment, I have to say. But I think it has potential of being good. Yeah,
and it's not available for Mythic Plus yet, which is a bit of a bummer.
It is, sir. Well, Halls of Atonement, I think. Yeah, it is.
Halls?
Yeah.
Halls is? Oh, I'm thinking of the angelic one. What's the big angels one?
Spires of
Ascension. Yeah, all these new names always get me tricked out. What about you, JB? Best and worst?
Plaguefall worst at the moment, just because of I think the dungeon will be better once they get the tuning down. But maybe I would agree with Robin, actually. Like, Necrotic Wake seems pretty boring, both from a like visually, it feels like a pretty boring dungeon. Like you walk in and it's dreary and not a lot going on there, and then it's pretty much you just run in a straight line, and it seems like I see a lot of now. Maybe people will start doing some crazy stuff later, but it does seem like pretty straightforward. I do have to say I like Mists. The little Mists mini game, I heard a lot of horror stories coming into beta about like, oh, wait till wait till you do the Mist thing. It's so stupid. But actually, of all the mini games that Blizzard has put in the dungeons, it's you test the group IQ pretty quickly. You got to look around, identify shapes and colors and stuff, and I could see some big brain plays in the MDI that make or break some keys. So I actually kind of like Miss.
Well, is that a big brain dungeon?
For the first 2 rooms, you can just follow the boss.
Yeah. You can kind of cheat on the first 2 rooms, but I do think that we it gets back to like BRH back in the Legion MDI with BRH when you're trying to run up the staircase and the boulders are coming down, and the meme potential is so strong there that I guarantee you're going to get in the MDI. And if there's no way to like automate that with a weak aura, if you actually have to look around the room and identify shapes and stuff, like, God, I guarantee there's gonna be some dudes that crack under that pressure, looking around like, is this circle or no? Is it filled or is it a flower? I don't know.
It's a healer job, dude.
You take all the responsibility.
It's a healer job.
What about you, Fab?
Oh, I'm for sure taking responsibility on that one. Yeah.
How about you, Fab? Best and worst?
I really like House of Atonement, even though it's like the timer in there is really lenient and needs to be fixed. But I like you can pick and choose whatever you want to do, except you have to kill the 3 big robots. Everything else is like up to you. which I like.
And worst, you're not getting away with it that easily.
Plaguefall for sure, especially after the changes recently. Like they
Why
put in.
Plaguefall? It's like a good dungeon. I
No,
don't
but-
understand.
I don't know. The barrels, the mushroom mines, everything's just annoying. I think
They've been trying to change that dungeon a few times though, right? I mean, last week we had weird tentacles that were now all over the room, and then they've got rid of it. Then they introduced a guy who threw boulders at you, but then they removed that as well.
There. No, it's still
they
there.
brought him back. He was disabled at least for 3 days.
Yeah, he was there today at least. So.
And the trash is all killable by environment stuff. So maybe that's a good point for us to start, is a lot of the trashy Plaguefall is killed by environment rather than anything else. The introduction of the Covenant-specific bonuses to dungeons. Let's kick off there. So we've seen some examples of that in Necrotic Wake, that you're going to have a Guardian and stuff in there. How do you guys feel that's going to play out, not only for you guys, but for everybody else once they start getting their higher key for their big loot? Maybe I'll throw that to Ander at first.
I think it's just going to introduce more toxicity in the dungeon finder than ever before. I don't think it's necessary to like make the dungeons feel unique. They already have different themes themselves, so I don't quite see the point in these like Covenant-specific things at all.
Everyone else want to
I think it adds, like, it definitely adds some flavor. I just don't think it's good. Like, it's just annoying for if you're tryharding dungeons, and like, because you need it. Well, you don't need it, but it makes it so much easier. Like how that robot gives you like a 50% damage buff, which is insane for the first boss. And there is another one later on.
It's only Kyrian, right? And Nightfall that has interactions, or?
There's
no,
also one
like
with Necrolords and Theater of Pain, but it's not usable yet. We don't quite know what it does, I think.
And there's probably gonna be one for Revendreth in, like, you know, Sanguine Depths or something. Maybe you can Door of Shadows through somewhere, skip something.
Well, on the Door of Shadows, have you guys found anything there? It was the big thing we were worried about, is M+ and specifically. Maybe has JB found anything where Venthyr skip has actually been a thing that feels relevant? Or is it actually the discovery that Soul Shape cancels combat?
I haven't. I think that's just going to be a high key thing. Like right now, I feel like so many of the keys, like when we do keys on M+ right now, we don't do affixes or because affixes suck. So you run around with like naked keys and just test mechanics and have fun testing out covenants and stuff. On high keys, I'm sure it'll be a thing where the like Venthyr and Soul Shape stuff starts becoming more relevant. But I actually don't know. I don't remember anybody in my group ever even trying to use Venthyr stuff. Just hasn't.
I haven't seen
that people have tried.
Haven't seen Venthyr, but like Soul Shape Knight of Shadowlands thing, that will definitely be abused.
I tried a lot of Venthyr actually on my DK when I played Venthyr, but I feel like the teleport is too. It's like 20 yards or something, right?
Yeah,
35, I think.
Wait, 35?
Well,
I had the issue that you couldn't really, you can't port line of sight, right? So if you're porting line of sight, it's not gonna let you port, and then you're gonna port over a pack. The ability is kind of too short, and you will either aggravate before you try and use it or like after you use it, So it's kind of.
I don't think it's far enough to get from one side of the pack to the other side of the pack without aggroing it.
Maybe it's gonna be somewhere. People are probably gonna find some use of it somewhere, but I don't think it's gonna be broken or anything like that.
There's one spot at the start of Mist where you can like also open something with Nightfare, but you can just teleport through with Venthyr and get your people through with a multi-seater mount.
No.
But it skips like
then
6 mobs.
Broken.
That's good to hear. If you're not seeing it in that respect, that it's obvious from the start, like this is going to be a problem or anything. If you guys aren't finding that, then that's probably really good for the casual base as well. Is that it's not a necessary thing. That was the worry, right? That this is going to be an obvious necessary thing. But maybe the Nightface Soul Shape later on kind of feels like it's needed.
Well, I would say it's definitely way too early to say whether or not Covenant stuff is going to be necessary. Like, if you think back to the beginning of BFA, there was a long time where like people didn't even realize the power of Shadow Meld. And like I remember all of season 1 with Infested, there was not like we did there was no MDI that season, but I remember we did the BlizzCon show match with the season 1, and that was with the infested affix, and like nobody shadow melded any of that stuff. And it wasn't until season 2 started and we started doing reaping, I realized, oh my god, dude, shadow meld's disgusting. Like this is wild how good this is. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that with the Covenant stuff, where in your everyday sort of play session, you may not understand how good it is, but people start figuring out specific situations where you use it, and it goes from like, oh, I could see how that might be good, to like, wow, you have to use this, or just adds 3 minutes.
No, that's awesome. No, I think a lot of people are really happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm happy to think
I
it.
have to ask about the knight. I didn't even know it drops combat myself. I haven't really.
It's one of the soul binds.
Is it intended, or is it?
Yeah, it's intended.
Yeah,
It is intended?
and in
Okay.
fact, there's a mob. I know there's interaction. There's like some mobs in Halls of Atonement that have stealth detection, and you can use that like meld thing in their face, and they'll turn around and walk away from you. Like they could be standing 3 feet from you when you turn invisible, and they'll turn.
Interesting.
I feel like it would be quite the easy fix though, if it actually would just do something to that ability, because it's in a Covenant tree, right?
Yeah, it's a
soul
soul bind, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's very cool.
But my weekly reset thing. Oh no.
Let's move on to a bigger topic then, that I know before we started, the guys were thinking this is where most of you may have your thoughts then. It's actually just the style and the pacing of the dungeons, because every single expansion they try and adjust things based on what's happened last time, and they alter the pacing. A lot of times the dungeons have back-to-back bosses in some cases, making you choose how you're going to use your cooldowns a little bit, bloodlust and all that kind of stuff. If we throw it to Fem, probably, what do you think about this? How this is differed from BFA so far?
I feel like 5 out of 8 dungeons are basically like trash, then boss, and I don't like that. Like, I don't know why. It annoys me, because I would rather like play trash boss, because it's just, you can't really plan your cooldowns, because you want to use cooldowns on every boss, preferably, if it's like
Well, not
hard.
necessarily.
Yeah, not necessarily, but it's still, I want to have the option to do so, rather than kill 80% trash in the beginning, and then, mod load style run boss to boss.
In Motherlode, you did have the option, but it was just the trash tuning.
It was
until
bad
people
options.
Figured out the VMZ.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like so far from the dungeons I've seen that the potential to pull trash onto boss, which isn't necessarily something you do in high key, but like thinking ahead to sort of the MDI, I do feel like the potential to pull trash onto bosses in the dungeons I've seen so far is not great. There's like a lot of bosses where either it's almost impractical to drag the trash onto it, or you literally can't. Like, cannot pull trash onto it. And I don't like that, because for, obviously high keys are one thing, but as I think towards the MDI, you feel bad anytime in the MDI when you do a boss just as, by itself. Anytime you just do a boss with trash, you feel like you're not on the ability.
You want
save
the option.
Time. Yeah. And so there are bosses that, like last boss in Necrotic Wake, you fly up and it's just you and him, and unless somebody figures out some really cool way to drag trash up there,
Snapping?
Yeah. And which, speaking of snapping, I feel like, I don't know if it's been intentional by Blizzard, but I have yet to see any of the dungeons. We've tested a few of the dungeons to see if there are ways to get mobs to snap, and so far I haven't been able to. Maybe there are some dungeons where it works, but in the dungeons we've tested it in, mobs just slow walk it. It's like, if you can snap, it's very difficult.
I have tried my best to snap as many mobs as possible, and I am yet to find a single snap.
Yeah.
It's very hard. There's a lot of invisible walls that block you off going onto anything that is like a slight edge where you would normally snap stuff.
I mean, you have to feel that's intentional, right? They don't want you to do that stuff, and they've probably taken dramatic measures to stop you doing some of the crazy snaps that we've seen over the course of BFA. And you guys okay with that? Like, do you think that's a fun addition, or is it actually kind of annoying? Like you said, at this point, they're kind of forcing you to go singular boss, and I think Necrotic Wake's the best example, right? They have a gauntlet before the third boss. You literally can't bring trash anywhere near it whatsoever. And then the last boss ports you to a completely separate arena to deal with that. And is it all these things adding up to maybe you guys feel it might be less fun higher up, or is this fine and it's just they fixed something that was a problem?
I mean, you know, we went through most of Legion with snapping being a pretty rare thing. You know, there were a few snap spots to figure out, but for the most part, you know, I remember when we were doing the Legion, like the last MDI in Legion, there were a lot of times where when snaps happened, you almost assumed that it was like a bug or a glitch when it happened, not intentional. You didn't really see the rise of snapping as a dedicated strategy until BFA. And certainly there were some dungeons where snapping was, I think, maybe more fun than doing the dungeon the way it was intended, because it was really hard to get the mobs. You know, like snapping at the beginning of Shrine, trying to get all those caster mobs grouped up sucked in a lot of ways. Like snapping was like, okay, good. Like this dungeon would be tolerable if you actually had to pull all these mobs together without snapping, but with snapping, it's better. But there are other things like Atoll where, you know, swords went from being a pretty dangerous thing in early BFA. You know, like you had to use like healing cooldowns and stuff to live through that. And now swords are just a joke. Free count. They jump onto a spot and you snap them on you and pick up your free count and move on. And it feels like a part of the dungeon just got removed. And I don't know that anybody enjoyed it. It's just that you had to snap to stay competitive.
So in many ways, they're fixing things that you kind of felt compelled to do, even though it obviously wasn't intended, just to be competitive.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Robin? I'm just calling you out because you just put something in your mouth.
I personally, I'm a fan of snapping to some extent, because I think like whenever you find a snap and that no one else knows about, you're like, oh, holy shit, boys, this is good, you know? We're gonna do something no one else has done before. But I don't really like the fact that a lot of mobs don't really do anything when they're snapped, like the swords, for example. I think it's just something you have to get used to, that you can't snap anymore. And I think it's healthy for the game in...
Yeah, I think we took it too far.
Yeah, I feel so as well. Like snapping 4 packs down to Ressa and playing with...
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
kind of weird, and I don't think they planned for that, really.
One thing I noticed, we had the Dream Gaming Mythic Plus tournament yesterday. And one thing that was noticeable, even from an average viewer, is those giant pulls that are the make or break. So we look at Underrot, for example, you know, the Cragmore room where you pull everything in, and maybe your team wipes, and you know, and you look, you can see the teams are gearing up for these mega moments. Have you found anything like that in these dungeons where you're like, okay, this is going to be so cool when we nail this?
I think you can pull some stuff off like that in Halls of Atonement at the start, maybe, because a lot of the mobs in the act a bit like the mobs in Legion, that when the tank kites away, they kind of stop doing stuff. So if the tank can live the pull, maybe you can finish it off. Necrotic Wake at the start, you can pull some crazy stuff off as well, I want to say. But in a lot of dungeons, the mob packs are pretty far away from each other, so I don't think it's gonna be as big of a part. Especially with Skystep on 5-minute cooldown as well, that's another thing to add.
Mainly would be the AOE cap, no?
Oh,
It's
AOE
not
cap
really
is also
efficient to pull 15 mobs if you can pull 5 into 5 and the tank can stay and do damage, you know? It's what I feel. I'm gonna have to play more with it. But...
That's also a thing. I mean, some classes are still
exactly
pretty uncapped, so if that becomes viable, those classes will be extra viable, you know?
Well, let's bring it on, because it is on our list of topics to hit here, is the AOE cap. We have seen a couple of videos flying around of massive pulls, but notably, as we said, in keys without affixes and things. Not that might make too much of a difference, but how do you guys feel about this AOE cap? A lot of the player base is really concerned about this, because some classes are, of course, uncapped. Maybe we can start with you, Ander, from a DPS perspective of seeing this vast skew in damage simply because your damage is capped.
Okay, I have to add to this. I am very biased to this because I played Fury Warrior for a big part of BFA, and I was capped all throughout that expansion. But in most dungeons, it doesn't feel like a big problem, but I just don't see the point of adding it. Like, it just removes some classes from doing stuff, which I don't agree with, honestly.
What about over to you guys? I'd also like to throw in as a side thought, maybe to you, Fem, is how does this shake up comp setups when you're looking towards the meta? Get, you know, uncapped versus capped. We get, you know, we ended up with triple BM hunters by the end of this expansion. How does that play into it as well?
I think that depends a lot on like how you pull the dungeons and also what actually does damage. Like, it doesn't matter if if you're uncapped on a, let's say, Affliction Warlock, and then you do like 100 DPS, because like, you won't be brought just because of that, you know. But I think that AOE cap is just annoying, because as a tank, I don't think about it because I'm not capped, and then I pull big, and then my DPSs can't do damage, and it's very annoying.
I don't understand the initial thought behind the AOE cap. Like,
Yeah.
why did they implement that into the game? Actually, like, what's the reasoning to cap spells to just hit? Like,
I
5
think
or 8
it's to
targets?
include other specs than, you know, the big blasters.
But there's always gonna be the big blasters. Then it's always gonna be the same. You know, it's one class is always gonna be better than another class, and then people are gonna spam Resident Sleeper Beam Hunter in the MDI chat. But it's always gonna be that one class that's a bit stronger, and then you're gonna play that class. And I don't think AOE capping is the right way to go about it. But I might be wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong. But
I feel like they're trying to like segment DPS class into this is a cleave specialist, this is big AOE class, something like that. I'm not sure if we need it, honestly. I don't think we need it, really.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about the AOE cap, like the concept of it, I was like, all right, I'll keep an open mind here because I can envision a world where Blizzard sees DPS as like a spectrum of sorts, like you know, from single target to completely uncapped, and that Blizzard maybe wanted to create sort of specialties along the way where like here's a class that's really good at single target, here's a class that's good at 2 to 3 target, here's a class that's good at 5 target, here's a class that's good at, you know, 10 to 20 target. But realistically, I don't actually think Blizzard's going to be, even if that is their goal, I don't think they're ever going to be able to tune that correctly. And now what you have is basically, I feel like there's just there's two types of classes now: classes that are uncapped and classes that are capped. And in the past, you had classes that were blasters that were going to do big damage on big pulls, and there were some classes that couldn't really do that. But now it's just like those classes. There's still that dichotomy, but the classes literally have a cap on. I mean, in the past, it was just like, yeah, your class doesn't scale that well on big pulls, but now it's like you actually only hit 5 things, which is not only feels bad, but it's also super counterintuitive. Like when even knowing that there's a target cap, like as a druid, for instance, when I run in and there's like 10 targets pulled together, you know, I drop Sunfire on it and I'm like, yeah, let's go. And I get in there, I start swiping, and you feel like, you know, he's like, yeah, dude, swipe them. And then you see 5 numbers pop up and you're like, what is that? Wait, why are there only 5? No, like, what? Come on, dude, there's 10 mobs. You're like, what's going on? And like, you have to like explain that to people almost, you know, like a new person coming into the game. If you pull, you know, 10, 15 mobs together and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to come in here and start wrecking. And, you know, like, I'm not wrecking. Why is nothing happening? And you have to go read the tooltip. It's like hits 5 targets. And it's like, well, that sucks. Like, why is that the case? Why does this only hit 5 targets? So I feel like it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't feel good. I don't understand why they did it. Like, it doesn't, nobody seems happy about it.
That is definitely the case, and you're right. Like, I never even thought about having to explain to people why, you know, because they'll just see a damage meter, right? That's what most viewers see, is a damage meter or whatever it might be, and they're just going to look at it and go, huh, so Druid sucks. That's my message that I'm taking away from this, is Druid sucks. But you're not wrong, because as the pulls get better and better, and you do start doing those bigger ones, there's some classes that are capped that are just going to fall behind naturally, right? The community is going to see that and just be like, well, I don't want to be that guy who's third for no other reason than Blizzard said I can't do it. And that could really shift the balance of the classes, right?
Well, what classes are actually capped though, compared to what classes are not capped? I feel like multi-dotters are not capped in general because they've never been. Yeah. And like melee classes are more capped.
Unholy is less capped than...
Unholy is like halfway capped.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it feels like to 8, and the Scourge Strike isn't capped. It feels a bit arbitrary like maybe with this,
they wanted to bring out more ranged classes. If you want to do big pulls, like you bring the ranged classes because they have the, you know, uncapped AOE. And if you want to, you know, it's always been, you know, bringing 3 melees because they have the short kick, they have the early damage, the instant damage, they don't have no ramp up time. And maybe their thought is that, well, you can go big, but it's gonna be more risky, you know. And
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because I know a lot of people are unhappy about it, and we're definitely already in that position where clips are coming out of people falling way behind, and not only that, other classes pulling way, way ahead, and people are deciding mains right now for Shadowlands, and I really hope that doesn't come and bite them in the arse later down the line. No new affixes, gents, that we know of. We could talk about the seasonal.
I guess the seasonal,
but what's talk to me, JB? What were you hoping for compared to what we got?
Something like not that we've seen. I mean, like, okay, look, again, keeping up in mind, like we see the new. I've already forgotten the name of it.
Prideful,
yeah. So I saw Prideful, and maybe it has the potential to be kind of cool, but mostly it's like just reading through it. It's like, okay, so it's Reaping 2.0. You kill stuff, and then something spawns, and people are quick to be like, but when you kill it, it blows up and deals damage or things around it, so you can use it strategically. And I'm like, that's still like literally Reaping. Like, that's even when you had Reaping, that's what you did with Reaping, is like you spawned Reaping and then you pulled Reaping into something else and used all of the bodies from Reaping to funnel damage. So even that part of it is like still just a continuation of Reaping. So given how many different things were out there that have not been, how many concepts you could bring into a dungeon to try to shake things up, like given how many things they still have not played around with, to just go back to the well and like use that concept of like kill some stuff and something else spawns, just feel I don't want to say it's lazy, but it's sort of uninspired.
Same for you guys. I mean, we haven't got it yet. We've got the data mined information. So I'll give it a read for you guys now in the chat who aren't sure of this. We're pretty sure this is going to be the new seasonal affix. Not confirmed. Is that it relates to a spell called Prideful that we have seen. And when you're killing trash, this is going to build up. And then at some point, it's going to release into a brand new enemy, probably called Pride or something, that absorbs all the pride from the players. It increases health by 100% and damage by 25% per pride absorbed. So potentially, you're actually going to spawn something that's going to wipe you guys, which would be pretty hilarious. It explodes on death, though, inflicting its max health as shadow damage, split amongst everything within 8 yards. And there are a couple more details to it, but it seemingly is that you guys are we're gonna be killing trash. It's gonna build up this meter or some sort of debuff. Then it's going to generate some sort of ad, and then we're able to actually utilize that to explode onto the enemies. And that does open some options, right, for massive pulls to spawn this gargantuan. And then there'll be this sort of playoff between how strong is it versus how useful is it to actually kill coming into it. So there are some slight differences there to Reaping of how tactically to use this thing. And also, it shouldn't particularly affect most people, because Reaping was really fun. I think we can all agree Reaping was actually kind of fun. It wasn't a big brain or anything, but it was kind of a fun extra affix compared to, say, Infested.
I think everyone can agree that Infested should never have been in the game.
But
that is true.
As we talked about before the show, like Infested was also the first one. Like they hadn't done it before. I'll give them a pass for that one.
That's fair. But let's go back to...
It's only gotten better since then.
Let's go back to you here then, Fab, because JB skillfully dodged it as a druid would. We didn't get any other affixes in general, though. And the chat is also bringing up a good point here, is Blizzard seemed reluctant to add positive affixes. Was that something you were hoping to see? Because as we've all done, I expect, on the beta, is when we're making a key, sometimes we've just made a tyrannical key just to have fun with bosses. And when you actually see all the affixes on display, you kind of realize they all kind of suck.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone was hoping for at least some new affixes, but and some removal of some, maybe. Tyrannical bolstering. Things that are not fun and just slow you down. But I don't know. I was hopeful, but I also didn't expect anything, to be honest. Like,
I feel like it's a shame.
Yeah,
I've cared a lot about affixes in general and tried to give them feedback and stuff on affixes in general, but I don't know why. I don't know if they don't have the manpower to focus on that right now, but I feel like it has so much potential, because it's a very big part of the game, Mythic Plus in general, and I feel like they could do so much more with it than they're doing right now.
Can you expand on that, Robin? Because obviously we are aware Blizzard is watching this. They didn't want to attend, but they are paying attention, and we wanted to use this as a platform for that information. So can you expand on that a bit?
It's mainly the fact that right now, when you do keys, right, you have one on death affix combined with one, I don't know what the other one is called, a random affix. I don't know the word for it.
Constant
Basically, you
problem.
have either bursting or you have sanguine or you have whatever other on death affix combined with a random affix kind of. So no matter what week it is, you always kind of feel like it's bad in some ways, right? Some weeks are less bad, other weeks are worse. Explosive ball swing, for example, it's terrible to play. And me personally, I would want, and like when you log on and you see, for example, if they had instead of on death affix, they could have a beneficial affix and then they could have a bad affix at the same time. So 1 week you would have this good affix and the other bad one, but it would still feel like it was rewarding to play the game instead of logging on and seeing 2 really bad affixes and like, yeah, well, I'm gonna do my weekly this week and then just log off, and mainly just. I think we've had the same affix now for 5 years, 4 years. I don't know how long since Bleeding came out, and I feel like something new kind of has to happen because you get bored after a while to play the same stuff over and over and over. And if they for this expansion release a few new ones, people would be hyped, try them out. It kind of gets it becomes like a new game to some extent because you never experienced it before. But when you have the same, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be the same. If they don't change the affixes, we're gonna have the same rotations. Just like we had in BFA, and it's just gonna be the weeks that are less shit compared to the really bad ones. And I don't think it's healthy gameplay that you just feel like this week is just not fun to play the game. It should be that you log on and you want to play the game instead of just, okay, this is just a weekly and then I'm gonna log off and do something else this week. And I think it's a shame because it has so much potential. But then yeah, I don't know why. Maybe they're looking into it. I don't know, but I really hope they are because I feel like I said, has a ton of potential to actually be really fun and play.
Yeah, I think kind of dovetailing off that, it's I would say one of the most frustrating parts about Shadowlands beta right now was at the outset seeing how much cool stuff came out for Tourgas, like the amount of effort that clearly went into developing new anima powers and developing an entire kit for each class. And you saw all this innovation that came out of Tourgas, all these new ideas coming out and like new ways to get buffs and play your class and have new builds come out. And it's like, oh, it's so cool. Hey, what are you guys doing for Mythic Plus? And it's like crickets, like literally nothing. Like nothing is like nothing has changed for Mythic Plus. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, what do we are going on? Like Robin said, there was I think it was maybe like 6 months into Legion, we had bursting and what was they added, it was like bursting and
they added Grievous and removed overflowing, I think.
Well, it was like three. I think it was like bursting, Grievous, and I want to say it was like one more. That
explosive got added late, I think.
Yeah, maybe it was explosive. And that's like the last thing. Now they've made like small changes to some of the affixes. They changed. There's like the change to bursting at the start of Shadowlands. They made Sanguine bigger at one point. They made like necrotic drop out of combat, things like that. But for the most part, we've had the same affixes now since a few months into Legion, and we're going on our third expansion of Mythic Plus, and it really feels like Mythic Plus almost was added in Legion with the intention of it being only ever a Legion thing. Like that, I almost get the sense that Blizzard put it in and they're like, we're going to abandon this at the end of Legion. This is just going to be a thing we try out for Legion. And then like it got really popular and they're like, oh shit, we can't drop it. We have to keep it, but we don't actually want to like do anything with it. We're just going to come out with new dungeons and then carry forward the Mythic Plus concept, because even the changes to the affixes, like the expansions change enough from expansion to expansion that the affixes almost stop making sense. Like bursting back in Legion was totally different than bursting in BFA because the throughput of healers was like so much higher in Legion. Like the ability to move someone's health bar was so much higher in Legion. You could have someone's health drop down to 10% and you could heal them back up to 100% in like 1 second. I'm like, that was a thing you could do. And in BFA, you see someone's health drop down to 10% and you just start, praying to whatever deity you believe in, because you don't have that kind of, now maybe at the very end with corruption, you had that kind of throughput, but for most of BFA, you just didn't have that kind of power as a healer. And so these affixes, even from expansion to expansion, stop being, what they were originally designed to be. and you don't even see the updates. Now, in some cases, like we saw Bursting here and Volcanic get some like changes at the end of BFA, which I think was sort of a nod to the fact that like, okay, these aren't really, we're not in the same environment that these affixes were created in. Maybe they need an update. But the fact that we're going to go an entire expansion without seeing a new affix at all is like, why? Like, why? This feels like such low hanging fruit. You just throw out, invent 3 affixes. Like it feels like it would be so little effort to make the player base happy.
I agree, but they have also done some, work to the, for example, bursting is now dispellable, so it's highly values that, a priest with master spell, for example. Volcanic knocks you up in the air now, so you can't really read and stay in them anymore. So I feel like they've done some stuff to the affixes, but it just needs more, and it needs rework. Like, for example, like this week on live, I think, what do they have? Bolstering explosive or something?
Tyrannical.
Yeah, and then I saw these affixes, and I'm like, well, so I'm going to do my 3 weekly keys on my characters, then I'm going to log into the beta, because I can actually play Fortified with good affixes in the beta. But instead, imagine if they wouldn't have the bolstering, and they would have something else, like a positive affix, for example, like the lower in health you are, the more damage you deal or something. So it's a risk reward kind of thing. And if they had that and explosive, I would be like, yeah, let's go and play, because that's still fun. I feel like I can play around that, and I can be greedy, and I can still have fun instead of bolstering, playing 3 mobs at a time. I guess I just really wish that they would change the layout and just so they attract people to want to play instead of I don't want to play this week.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to Tourgas, like that again, when you compare Tourgas to Mythic Plus, like it becomes all the more frustrating, because that is the entire concept of Tourgas. As you move through Tourgas, you get buffs and more buffs and more buffs, and your character gets better and better and stronger and stronger. And like that's the journey through Tourgas, is like, how overpowered can I make my character, and how fun is it when I actually hit these high floors and my character feels like a god that just does all this cool stuff. And then you go into Mythic Plus, and it's like, what's the underpinning concept of Mythic Plus? We're gonna make this dungeon suck. Like, that's the affixes are here to make this shit harder and less fun than they would otherwise be. And it was one thing when Mythic Plus kind of existed on its own, and you could be like, maybe Blizzard just feels that that's the way that high level content should be, is it should be more punishing and it should be harder. And that's the way that you attract players, is by challenging them. But then you literally see that they understand that like making characters stronger and better is fun in the form of Tourgas. And it's like, oh, dude, like, what? Give that to me. Put that in Mythic Plus.
I'm sure it's widespread across the player base. And they summarize what Now said as well. It's like the dead key week. And we see it all the time. Yeah. Like I see it in general chat. Like that, we all probably look for our M+ groups in very different ways. But for the guys who try and pug it, they're like, "What are the affixes this week?" And they're like, "It's dead key week." And then there's people, if you're someone who gears primarily from Mythic Plus, you're kind of like, well, crap on me, right? That's not the way to go. Do you think positive affixes though would like a positive and a negative that can work congruently together and something like that? Or is it a case of mix and match as we get now? They try and combo them so the combos work badly together. So it almost creates a third terrible situation, right? When you get something like bolstering and explosive on stop, it's like, oh, come on. Like
exactly. I just feel if they have, a positive affix every week, you're still gonna see this bad affix, but you always gotta get reminded that, yeah, this is bad, explosive is bad, but we still get this positive affix, so it's still gonna be, fun to play. Instead of having both bad ones, you just, you're not gonna feel entitled to play. You're not gonna log into the game, and I don't know. It's just sad. I really think it would be very, very good to have this, one positive and one negative affix, and they would rotate, and then it would probably be hard to balance it in the start. But if they actually put a lot of time and effort into it, I think it could be possible, and I think it would be very appreciated from the community in general that, oh, this week it's this affix, I love this one, let's go and play, And yeah.
No, I agree. It was an eye-opening experience too, because you guys do PTR and stuff for MDI, so you have these tournament realms that you go on where you can build your own key. And that's what we have in the Shadowlands beta right now. And it's only when and I know a lot of people don't have access to beta yet, but once you actually see that screen and you're like, what do you want to put on this key? And you scroll through it and you're like, Nothing. I don't want to put anything. I don't want to put any of these on the key. And that's when it really settles in. It's like, okay, let's pick. And you end up with this conversation happening amongst the group. What's the least annoying? And as you said, they've now changed Volcanic because people just couldn't be bothered with Volcanic. And I don't know whether you feel better about this, JB, or not, as a healer, is that the casters just stood in Volcanic because, that's your problem, not mine.
Well, who has casters in their group, man?
For us plebs, who still take casters to groups. But now they've made it so Volcanic does throw you into the air completely and can still kill you, I think, if it spawns under you again, without you being able to do anything. Do you think that's a positive change? Or is it, again, it feels like a change like, no, we want you to really care about this. And that's the sort of attitude they go into M+ with is, we want this to be harder and we want you to care about this kind of stuff. Rather than, is this fun?
I feel like they're changing Volcanic and Bursting just to change something, so that they can say that they changed something and they improve the game, rather than actually putting time and effort into it.
I think the Bursting change was good. I think making it a magic dispel, I think that encourages, one thing, like the very first time I saw Samrek in this latest season, and then you saw three unavoidable fears come out every time. Like, my very first thought was like, oh my God, dude, they literally put this dude in the game to encourage you to bring shamans and priests. That's why this guy exists, is because you can either mass dispel it or you can tremor totem it, but otherwise you basically have to sit in it. And I was like, is this really just like this blatant to just put this mechanic in to encourage you to bring these classes that are underrepresented? And in some ways, Bursting, making it a magic debuff, felt like a more organic way to do that, which is like this is a tool that priests have that is sort of underutilized in Mythic Plus, that they can get rid of a bunch of magic debuffs at one time, but that's really not a situation you find yourself in very frequently, having magic debuffs go out on the entire group in an impactful way. Now it does. You do have that with Bursting, and there are some classes that really, some classes have a super easy job of dealing with Bursting. And some classes really struggle with it. And so this allows you to kind of pick, like, all right, I have one singular magic dispel. I can use it on the class that doesn't really have, like, there are some pulls you do, like in the MDI, where you might get like a 20 stack of Bursting. And if you've got like a DK that can AMS it, it's a cinch. But then you've got other classes that don't have like an immunity or way to get rid of it. And, they are legitimately sweating when you're going into that pull. Like, oh God, dude, like, what if, if I don't get the heal at exactly the right time, I'm going to fall over. So, I do think the Bursting change was kind of nice. The Volcanic change, that Volcanic has just felt like a dead affix since the start. Like, I don't think it's ever scared anyone. Honestly, even now that it knocks you up, it's still not that scary. Like, it doesn't knock you up far enough to like kill you. I was kind of hoping when they originally announced it that it was going to do like the old, back when in Freehold, when the shell bounces on the turtle scaled with the key level, and if you tried to do it on a 20, it would literally send you like 100 yards in the air. I was kind of hoping it would be that type of thing where you'd actually like fly up so far that you would die if you didn't have a way to land safely. But I do. The Tyrannical feels kind of like moving, the moving stuff around on the Titanic, the deck chairs around on the Titanic.
Just sliding around.
That affix. Yeah, that affix just still doesn't feel like you have to pay much attention to it.
One thing I did want to bring up, because it was, as you guys were chit-chatting before we got started, is, and I've seen it in the chat as well, is universally hatred of Tyrannical. A little bit more thought on that, maybe on these two that we've had, again, since forever. We've had Fortified and Tyrannical since this got started. Seemingly common sense, it makes sense. Some weeks it's harder trash, some weeks it's harder bosses. Would you care to expand on that still remaining, still staying in its same BFA form? Or were you hoping to, because we do have these different tiers of affixes, was that something that they were going to adjust or entirely remove? And would you think that would be a benefit? If I come over to you, Fem.
I think they should just remove it. Like, it just adds another layer of just more numbers. Like, if they just removed it, you would just do like a key level higher, but everything would be standardized like throughout the weeks. Because right now, high keys is not playable on Tyrannical. You can do your weekly, no levers. Like, then you're done.
We do see this massive change in potential or possible keys when Tyrannical pops up.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Ander, is it something you were hoping to see gone as well? Because from a DPS point of view, which is what I've mainly played, when it gets to Tyrannical, I'm just bored. Like, the boss just takes forever. It's just not particularly interesting. But obviously, I'd like your input on it as somebody playing at that tier.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of bosses on Tyrannical, because dungeon bosses generally are not super interesting. They do get boring if you sit there and hit them for 4.5 minutes or something. It just keeps doing the same thing over and over again. While there are a lot of bosses in Shadowlands coming that are pretty interesting, I still don't think it's a necessary affix to have. Just as Fem said, we already have infinite number scaling on the keys. Why do we have another layer of number scaling on top? Do we need this? I don't think so, really.
Same for you guys.
Honestly, I feel like I kind of go against the grain here. I actually don't have a problem conceptually with the idea of fortified and tyrannical. I kind of like having like this week trash is the bigger deal, this week boss is the bigger deal. Now, clearly, tyrannical has been overtuned like crazy, but I feel like if all you did was take tyrannical and cut the HP increase from 40% to something more like 20%, I feel like it would do a lot to address the disparity in the two affixes. Because there are some bosses that I feel like do get more interesting the longer they go. As an example, like Merektha in Temple, I went probably 2 or 3 months in BFA before finding out that ads spawn at the end of Merektha. Merektha died so fast every time that I didn't even know that snakes came out at the end of that fight. And I remember the first time it happened, I was like, did they change this fight? Like, what the hell are these? Like, where do these come from? And they're like, oh yeah, those spawn after, like 30 seconds into the last phase or whatever. I'm like, seriously? Like, what, where the hell have these been the entire time? And there are some bosses where, like, if the boss takes longer, it starts adding a different layer of complexity to the boss. But the problem is that you get, like, for instance, you go to Soulbound Goliath and Waycrest and you do that boss for like 3.5 minutes. And a lot of times, I'll have people come into my chat like, I wish the MDI did higher level keys. I think that's more interesting. And I'm like, let me show you what a high level key looks like. Like, watch me fight Soulbound Goliath, and we will stand here and beat on this boss for like 1.5 minutes before we do one reset where everyone gets lit on fire. And then we'll go right back to DPSing the boss for like 1.5 minutes, and then it dies. And like, I'm like, trust me, you don't want to see this in the MDI. This is not what you want. You don't want this on like a 25 in the MDI on Tyrannical. You will be bored. This is boring, even for the people participating in this fight. This is a boring fight. And so there are some bosses that, Tyrannical makes them bad, but there are some bosses that I think, when the boss goes longer, you actually have to start getting exposed to these affixes that you have to, or to these mechanics that you have to plan around that just aren't there on Fortified.
I would like to throw this back towards the Shadowlands perspective then, because like Ander just pointed out, they seem to have put a lot more effort into bosses this time around. There's some boring ones, but for the most part, they do quite a lot of stuff. Spy is a good example. Of course, Mists of Turner Scythe. Everybody here knows the nightmare that is the last boss right now, unless you can blow that thing up. Are we seeing any dungeons that flat out don't work with the affixes? If we can segue these two things together, you just know that Sanguine in here is just nightmare fuel. Is there anything you've seen, Robin, that's been a bit like that, where you're like, oh my god, please don't make this key with this affix?
Not affix particular. I haven't really played bolstering, but I could see bolstering being really bad in, for example, Necrotic Wake, because there's a lot of different HP pools in that dungeon. But I don't know exactly how you're gonna find ways around it. But bolstering is always kind of a painful affix, right? It's not a really hard affix. It's just annoying because you need to go smaller and you need to plan accordingly and seize his stuff and bring them in late, and it's just a lot of effort for a very small gain. Apart from that, I don't really know though. And also something we didn't cover with the tyrannical affix. I feel like a big part of it, that this is for the, I don't know what to call us, but the people actually enjoy pushing very high keys, is the fact that you just hit a wall where every DPS player in the group needs to either equip avoidance or, now in the end of BFA, versatile corruptions, to just live the fight or just get one shot. And I feel like it's been all the way since Legion, right? And I don't feel like there's they didn't think about the fact that people would push these high keys when they designed the affixes in the first place. Like, Fortified never really matters because trash aren't really going to one-shot you, no matter if they do 30 or 40% more damage. But when you get up to the 20, 28, 29, 30 key level, increased damage on the bosses is just going to, straight up kill you. And people are right now pouring out of the dungeons for the last boss to equip, avoidance and burst amps and all that stuff, instead of just playing their class and playing the fight the way it was supposed to be played. And I don't know. I feel like they just need to buff the dungeons, and I think it was a good, thought from the start, but it just got out of hand, and they should have seen themselves how annoying this were for players. I remember myself in Legion, for example, as well. The tanks had to play, healer trinkets to put absorbs on people because they couldn't live by themselves, and it's just when you do really high keys, it just scales out of hand, and I don't think anyone enjoys it. Particularly instead of okay, so I can't do damage on this fight. I need to equip all these defensive items, so my damage is going to be really bad, but at least I live. It's kind of that mindset you have to play with right now, and I don't know. I feel like they should just remove both the affixes, maybe come up with something else, and just buff both the bosses and the trash by 20%, and it should be the same every week. And it's also gonna increase because we have these dead weeks during Tyrannical where no one really wants to play the game, and there's gonna be fewer of these and more of the more decent weeks to actually play the game.
I think to be clear here, though, I mean, this is a natural issue with Mythic Plus with the infinite scaling, right? Is the issue more that Tyrannical scales much quicker? So, even for the guys doing the very high keys, and this affects everybody all the way down to trying to do a weekly 15 or whatever, is that the issue is a 15 fortified is just not even close to a Tyrannical of the same key at 15. Because obviously in Mythic Plus, it's going to scale to the point where you're getting wiped out. That's a natural occurrence. It just happens far too quickly with Tyrannical.
I think the main point is that fortified is avoidable. There's always stuff you can do against trash. You can, have the tank kite. You can pull something else. You can seize one of the dangerous mobs. But there's no counterplay against the boss. You just have to go through that increased damage and HP. There's no way around it. And then counterplay. The increased difficulty, and I think that's a very big part because fortified is just there's always something. You can ask for a binding shot from a hunter, you can have a ring of peace, you can kite if you don't have cooldowns as a tank. The healer knows that this trash build is a bit more it's harder. You can save cooldowns. Let's not do the it's always something that you can address the situation with when it comes to fortified. But then once again, like Tyrannical, last boss in, let's just pick an example in Tourgas, if you get a double, you're just dead. How are you going to counterplay that? It's not like the tank can run or the healer can put cooldowns. It's just, well, good luck, kind of. And then I think that's a big thing that either they need to change the boss design or they need to, well, preferably in my case, remove Tyrannical and Fortified. But if the bosses instead of, if last boss in Tourgas did 50% of the initial damage, and then it, would add a dot, like it already has a dot, so that's a bad example, but, they would just lower the initial damage, you would still live, and it would require healing after, so something like that. So you wouldn't hit the break points where we just straight up get one shot.
Well, that's fair.
I mean, I actually feel like, and I'm probably in the vast minority here, but I actually I do not anymore like the idea of infinite scaling in Mythic Plus. I actually wish that it would go back to more of a challenge mode type setting, where rather than trying to see how high you can push the key, it just becomes strictly about how fast you can do it. I feel like the infinite scalability of Mythic Plus guarantees that dungeons will become imbalanced by the end of the expansion. That it's a lot of it, like if you look at raids, for instance, like the reason why raids are so well tuned is because there is a static boss difficulty. Bosses do not continually creep up in health every week. Their abilities don't hit harder and harder each week as you try to push more and more. You just have this boss, it does this much damage, it has this much HP, and you can tune everything around that. In Mythic Plus, you guarantee, that's basically players are seeking to hit the point where dungeons are too difficult. You go until you get one shot. That's what stops you. Or that you can't do enough damage. But realistically, in most cases, it comes down to you start getting one shot by stuff. You stop being able to live through stuff. That's usually how most keys get blown at high levels, is you cannot live through it. That's a really shitty way to fail a dungeon, to just not be able to do anything about it and just know that you're going to die to it. And I feel like it would be much easier to balance Mythic Plus, and I think it would be more enjoyable if instead of saying that the competition is to see who can push the key the highest, it's just the highest level key you can do is a 20. And when you hit a 20, instead of continuing to go higher, you just pull more and more and more and more and more. And the goal becomes to see who can do the dungeon the fastest. And the Side benefit of that also is that then it aligns the MDI with live play. Because one thing that I have found to be kind of disconcerting about doing the MDI is, for instance, when you do the AWC, what you see in tournament play is what you see on live. Like when you go from watching like a Sea-Doo or a Peekaboo or a Waz, and you go watch them in the tournament, you're seeing mostly the same stuff. Like maybe the comps change a little bit, maybe the meta changes a little bit, but the gameplay is the same. It's 3 people fighting 3 people. But when you watch guys stream Mythic Plus on live, you see them pushing keys as high as they can. And then when you go watch tournament play, you see something completely different. You see guys doing artificially lowered keys as fast as they can. And you're like, people don't even know what they're watching. It like you can't necessarily appreciate the pulls you're seeing because that's not your experience on live. That's not what you're watching on live. And I feel like it makes it hard for the audience, for Blizzard Esports, to appreciate the product that's being put out there because that only ever exists in tournament play. There is no live counterpart to that. And I feel like if you put a cap on live play, that then now you're seeing in the MDI the same stuff that people are seeing, and they can appreciate. They can go like, wow, dude, I've tried this on a 20. That is a crazy fucking pull, dude. Like that is so insane. Whereas if you do that in the MDI right now, guys are like, it's a 19. Who cares? These are small keys. Like this pull's easy as shit. Go do a 27. And so I feel like it would also make esports more approachable by the average viewer, and that there would be an easier time for people to follow along with that.
It definitely makes it more relatable because, like you said, you're doing things in the MDI or even on your stream as somebody who doesn't follow. That I don't get. Is that hard? What you just did? What exactly is happening on? Because I'm not going to try it. You know what I mean? I'm not going to try what your guys are doing. So it's big. The actual infinite scalability, at least from my POV, kind of puts me off. It's just going to keep going and going and going. So for somebody who does it for his weekly, I'd go, oh, what are we doing? And they're like, oh, we're doing a 19. I'm like, why? Is it so we can just not have to get a key higher next week or whatever it is? But if it was a reasonable, achievable cap that was high play, I would definitely consider that. It would definitely bring it in more for me, and I could certainly appreciate the MDI more, because all I see is I'm not sure exactly why what you're doing is difficult or why 3BM Hunters is cool. It actually annoys me. It makes me not want to watch it, right? For both POVs. It's like, okay, so you pull everything together and then 3BM Hunters go AoE, or the Unholy DK does sick AoE. Did you have to pull off something crazy for that? Because I can't relate. What exactly amounts of CCs did you involve in that? How do you guys feel about such a suggestion? If I come over to Ander.
Like, I have to say, it's like what JB said, it's really hard to relate to the MDI coming from live. Like, I remember in the first MDI in BFA, I didn't play, I watched most of it, but it was interesting to me. But playing the MDI myself this season you get a much better feel for how hard these pulls is, how much you have to coordinate. Stuff has to go right in every single second all the time, otherwise you will die, even though it's only 19s or in the finals 21s in that case. It is still incredibly difficult to pull those things off, and I'm not sure if I would want to stop Infinite Scaling on live though, because you can do different things with dungeons, and just closing something off is also something I wouldn't want, if you get what I mean. It just takes options away from us.
Same for you, Fan, or what's your POV on it?
I don't know. It sounds fun, but then AOE caps, you know? Like, yeah, go pull more in this 20. I mean, I can only hit 5 targets anyway, so, you know.
I mean, that is definitely a thing. Going back to the, you guys have done so much dungeon testing on the beta. We did ask this over to now. But Ander, have you seen any dungeons where you've gone, oh god, these affixes do not work? Or have Blizzard done a really good job this time of saying, okay, all these, we're not going to get that toll to go pull everything through the walls situation. It's not all super tight corridors for the Sanguine. Do you feel like they've done a good job that there shouldn't be not only the dead key because of the affixes, but actually because of the dungeon combo as well? Because they did prevent us from being able to swap that key to a different dungeon.
The only really bad thing I've noticed is Plaguefall, the last boss room with all these Devoted, where that one big mob keeps teleporting from pack to pack, and those mobs are kind of scary, so that's not really too great to play on bolstering. And other than that, it's
I think
So,
it's
yeah.
bad on any affix.
Yeah,
Like literally any affix
and
is bad in
Sanguine,
that
because
turn.
they are so
Yeah.
slow. Like, you kill one, even if it's just like 5% lower than the other one's just gonna sit in that Sanguine unless you have Mask Grips ready or something, because they are so slow. And you basically play for bolstering every single week in there, which is not fun, I think.
I will
I
say,
wouldn't be surprised if these mobs are not
Yeah, it's
benefiting from affixes, though. It wouldn't be a
it's a bit
surprise
like
to me.
in-
Kind of like
in
the
Horde-
heals in
Yeah,
Shrine,
in
in the
Hordes of
end.
Atonement, you have something similar with the guy before the last boss. They keep spawning those ghosts. They currently have on-death affixes, which is obviously unplayable on Bursting, Bolstering, and Sanguine in that room. But that is 100% a bug.
I will say one
Yeah.
thing I've appreciated about the dungeons I've seen so far is it feels like most of them are pretty open. Like I haven't yet felt like I've run into a lot of situations that are synonymous with like Toldagor or Waycrest, where you're in these very cramped, very tight spaces where you just don't have a lot of room to move stuff around. Obviously, Sanguine being kind of the big issue there, where you just don't have a place to drop Sanguine where it's convenient. Whereas I feel like so far the dungeon, now admittedly, I've really only played through the dungeons that are available on Mythic Plus right now. I haven't really looked at the other ones. But for the ones that I've seen so far in Mythic Plus, it's felt like they give you a lot of room to work with, a lot of ways that you can move mobs. Now, maybe the mobs don't move much on their own, but there's at least places to drop Sanguine where it's not awful.
So you haven't done the
So-
Sanguine Depths then? The ironically,
Yeah, I
It's
think
Sanguine
that's the
Depths
only one.
and
Like,
one
that
wing
would
of
be-
the other side that are bad for it. I want to
Yeah,
say
I was
the
going to
rest.
say that as well. The, other
The
side
rest
somewhere
is a lot of space, and you can play around stuff very well, which is good.
oh, that's awesome. And we'll wait and see on that, as hopefully they are going to introduce this ideally this coming Thursday, and we can see what they're doing with those and get more Mythic Plus going. I wanted to kind of come to a more general discussion of how you feel the dungeon going forward, not just from your top end POV, but is there things you're noticing, particularly with the classes? Are there any classes, because we've got the multi-rollers here, maybe start with JB, healing wise, with a lot of unpruning, a lot of new legendaries coming in. I know you've been trying out different healers. Is there anything that's clearly standing out as like, okay, this is a meta problem starting here, and that some classes maybe need some addressing based on the dungeons and playtime you've had with them?
Like some of it's still early. We're still early enough in beta that some of these classes still aren't done yet. Like it's clear, a good example of this, for instance, is like on Mistweaver. I have people ask when I play Mistweaver, like, how's this feeling for Shadowlands? I'm like, I have no idea, because a lot of the stuff that I would want to use for Mistweaver just like straight up doesn't work. Like there's like the fist weaving legendary that doesn't trigger off of Rising Sun Kick or Blackout Kick procs right now. There's the fact that the way that they took away the crane from the PvP talent, added it as a regular talent, but it like doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Clearly hasn't been changed at all with the thought, it used to be that like spinning crane kick, they needed to like nerf the healing that spinning crane kick did, because if you spun on 10 or 20 mobs, it would do insane healing. But now that you're capped at 5 mobs, you don't need that anymore. So it's just, you could tell that Mistweaver is not where it's going to be when Shadowlands comes out. So it's hard to tell in some cases, like, is this class just undertuned, or is this even representative of what I'm going to be looking at? I will say that I don't know that we're going to see big changes from the meta. Like, for instance, every expansion that comes along with Mythic Plus, people are like, is this the expansion that Shaman becomes relevant? And I'm like, probably not. Like I don't want to get anybody's hopes up here. But there's still enough holes in the Shaman kit that I don't see it becoming like a meta healer. And it looks like the healers that have been good at Mythic Plus are probably going to continue to be pretty good at Mythic Plus. And so in that sense, I don't know that things are going to get shaken up tremendously from the healer perspective. Now, some of the other roles, it does look like some classes that used to be good may come back into the meta. I know the tanks have been super excited to get back on their blood DKs, but from a healer perspective, I don't know that I've seen anything that's like, wow, wait for Shadowlands, it's going to be totally different.
Well, we do have 2 tanks with us tonight, so I'll start with now because he's smiling about his blood DK. I know when I checked out your stream, you were trying literally every tank Covenant combination you could. Warriors got some interesting tank changes coming into the Shadowlands. How are you generally feeling? Is there anything you think needs to be addressed from the dungeon perspective with the tanks?
I mean, I'm really happy that DK, like you said it yourself, has seen the light again, kind of. Apart from that, I feel like there's 4 out of the 6 tanks look decent right now. Warrior and Druid are looking pretty weak, but the other 4 ones are looking, all of them, pretty solid. And I don't feel like there's one, tank that's massively overpowered compared to other ones, like kind of like Warrior was before the nerfs, even after the nerfs in BFA. I'm just a bit sad that even though I'm not the biggest Warrior fan myself, I play it a lot, so people think I really enjoy Warrior, but I'm still a bit sad because I feel like they didn't really know how to balance Warrior and Plus, and before, like, instead of like reaching out to the community or like whatever to try and get balance them the right way, they just threw in some changes that weren't what needed to be done at all, and then it just made Warriors really, really bad instead. And I'm still surprised, like, why did you change this? Because it was it's not why Warrior is good or bad in Plus in general. It's just weird.
How about you, Fem?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, especially, I mean, it's really fun to get to play something else as a Fodem reroller. I do enjoy playing other things, and it's fun when you...
Do you go where you're told?
Yeah, but like, it's, as Robin said, really sad to see Warriors, like, they are so bad right now. Like, they play so badly. It's not like about numbers or anything. It's about how it feels when you play it.
Exactly. It just feels really awkward to play them. It doesn't feel good at all.
And I've tried like every Covenant, every Soulbind, everything on them, and like nothing makes them feel good. And it's really sad to see.
The synergy just got completely wrecked.
Yeah.
Intentionally, I might add. They tend to do that. Look at what's if it's too dominant, it's you're in line to get the hammer, which seems to have been what's happened with Prot Warriors. And maybe they'll readdress it. We still have tuning to go, and lots of classes still aren't finished. Although the clock is ticking. We are in August now, and this game is coming out ideally before the end of the year. So let's hope something happens there. And DPS wise, obviously AOE Cap, big effect on you. You play several roles in dungeon and tournament play. How are you feeling about the DPS point of view?
It's incredibly hard to tell because we don't know yet how big we're actually going to end up going in live key scenario or MDI scenario. So the AOE cap might not matter too much. Then some classes like Rogue are going to be incredibly strong because Rogue utility is always going to be good in dungeons. And if AOE cap really makes classes like deadweight basically because they don't do damage, then the multi-dotters are gonna shine obviously, but I think it's just too early in the cycle still to say what's gonna be good, what's gonna be bad. Guess I'll just level different stuff and hope for the best,
I mean, it's the same way when people come into my stream and like, no, memes aside, people ask me what DPSs are looking like the best right now in a plus, or like what tanks are looking to be the best, and it's usually DPSers are not only, there for the damage. Demon Hunter is both on plus a lot of time because of their utility and the fact that they can't die, Same with the rogues, the shroud, the utility, the crowd control, everything they bring to the group is just, almost too good to miss out on. So every time someone asks me this question, like, well, what's looking good for M+, and I just answer probably the same as in BFA, close to some minor changes. Some classes might shine, they get some added utility, whatever, but dungeons, it's usually, it's a lot about control, kicks, and all the utility.
I mean, Shaman got Wind Fury, right? So, game changer.
Yeah, but there's still a Shaman.
The biggest issue I see with the whole multi-dotter train is a lot of mobs still have casts that need to be stopped. And if you have 3 people in the group that have 24-second or longer interrupts, you're just gonna sit there and we're dead now. So that's not going to work for sure.
That's fair. That is totally fair. As we're coming to the close, I wanted to kind of go through you guys individually and ask your general thoughts on how things are shaping up. You've obviously been playing Dungeons so much. We've seen it on your streams, etc. Or general feeling of maybe anything Blizzard needs to look at, specific dungeons or overall, pacing, all those kinds of elements, but your own individual takes on everything you've checked out so far. And we are, again, reminder, we are limited to 4 Mythic dungeons so far. Hopefully we'll get more. Maybe we can kick off with Fem on this one. He's staring directly into my soul. As to how it's been for you in all that testing and looking forward, as I assume you guys are, to Dungeons when this goes live.
I mean, overall, I'm happy. But I think that's also because it's mostly a change of scenery from BFA, kind of done with BFA. So, but there's a lot to come still, right? We only have 50% of the dungeons, which is we can only judge 50% of the Mythic Plus dungeons right now, and some of them are looking good, some of them are looking less good. But I trust Blizzard, to be honest. They'll do well.
Mr. JB.
Well, it does kind of look like we're going to get more of the same, I think, with Mythic Plus. Unfortunately, I do think the AOE cap is going to be it may not be a problem in high keys nearly as much. But, I feel like a good benchmark is, as Anna said, anybody who's played Fury Warrior in BFA has sort of, I think, already experienced what this AOE cap is going to feel like, which is that there are a few dungeons in BFA where Fury Warrior was still decent because there just weren't, like in King's Rest, you didn't necessarily feel super punished for bringing a Fury Warrior because there were very few huge pulls that you did. But any dungeon where you started to pull a lot of stuff, Fury Warrior was just they kind of got put on timeout while, the real classes did damage. And then the Fury Warrior would come back in for the smaller pulls. So I feel like we already know exactly how the AOE cap is going to play out. And that if anyone acts surprised that the AOE cap did, if this is an experiment that doesn't work, if anyone acts surprised, 3 months, 6 months from now, it's kind of no, there was nothing surprising. The surprising thing will be if it works. I think if the AOE cap ends up not being an issue, if dungeons end up feeling, natural, even with the AOE cap, that I think will be the surprising thing. And you're like, oh, wow, they actually pulled it off. That's very impressive. But I guess this is one of those things where I feel like there are times where Blizzard makes changes to things, and I don't understand why. And there are times where Blizzard makes changes to things, and I understand why I don't like the change, but I understand why they made it. But the AOE cap thing is a change where I don't understand why they made it, and I don't think anybody likes it, which is part of why I don't understand it. And so it just feels like it's going to be bad for balancing, which is bad for Mythic Plus, and that it's going to be a thing we contend with either until they change it or for the rest of the expansion. And I guess that sort of sets the tone for the rest of Dungeons for me, is what are we going to do with the AOE cap? How is this going to change the way dungeons work? Now, other than that, I feel like the dungeons, so far from what I've seen, the bosses seem interesting. The bosses we've done seem to have mechanics that are interesting. Some of them I really, some of the bosses I really like.
Specifics, please, instance, JB. Come on.
For instance, third boss of Mr. Tirnasai with the having to identify the shapes thing. Again,
dodgeball?
Great
Patty
meme
cake?
Potential. No, not the dodgeball, but having to do the guessing game, having to look around really quickly and have to make that snap decision, of oh, it's the unfilled leaf. Do that real quick. And knowing that every second that you spend, on high keys, I'm sure every second that you spend in that phase, panicking, trying to figure out which thing you need to be attacking is one more tick of damage that you're going to take. And it could be the difference between, it's like going back to Nelth Slayer when you had to do the guessing game on the pillars and, they're swapping around. You're like, I swear to God, on my mom's grave, it is third from the left. And you kill it and the rocks are still coming down. And everyone in the group's you're never getting invited back. That's the kind of high pressure stuff I like on a boss fight. Sorry, did I say third? Yeah, second boss, Tirnasai, sorry. So bosses like that. Yes. So that's a boss fight I really like. Tredova in the same dungeon. The concept of Tredova I actually really like. The idea of you're gonna get a swirly put underneath you and then a predictive swirly. I think that's a cool concept. The execution of it, I think, is terrible because you don't get any visual indicator of where the predictive splash is going to go, which I feel like is both unintuitive because I'll be honest, I did the boss 5 times before I even realized what the hell was going on. I just kept dying to something, I'd like the swirly would come out and I'd move and then I'd just get clapped. And I'm like, what the hell just happened to me? And finally someone's like, oh yeah, it predicts like where you're going. And then it sprays there, but there's like nothing to indicate that you just got hit by it. It just, it's like, the invisible hand of God, like
and that
slapped you and you're like, what
thing
what just
learns
happened?
as well, right? That thing can learn like crazy.
Right. And so I feel like you need to have some kind of visual indicator that says like, here's where the swirly's going and here's where the next one's coming out. And the fact that there isn't anything there to tell you why you just died, you just died. That's all there is. That's all, unless you go back and comb through the combat log, you don't necessarily know why. So I like the idea of the boss. I don't like the execution. I think we'll see it change. I don't think it'll go live in the fashion that it is now, because it's both a confusing mechanic to explain to new people, and it's confusing to even when you know what's going on. It's confusing. I still don't fully understand how the predictive thing works. I know that like I should run a lot, but I don't necessarily know exactly why it's picking the spots where it's picking. So anyway, there are some bosses that I think are very well, like the concepts behind them are fun and I enjoy doing them. I'm looking forward to those. It's just that it feels like the rest of the stuff, like the AOE cap, the covenants again are a thing that, like right now, corruptions are kind of in the same deal where like I see like one of the worst feelings I had in my history of WoW was we went and did the MDI and I had my corruption set up before that. And then I came back and I found out that like everyone's playing versatile corruption, and knowing that I picked wrong with my corruption and knowing how much effort was going to be required to like farm up versatile corruptions and then have to farm versatile gear and then have to farm sockets to put on the versatile gear, that felt so incredibly bad. And I'm scared that that's the way that Shadowlands is going to feel, where you pick something and then you see other groups using like covenants that you didn't pick and using them to great success and great effect. And rather than feeling good about your covenant, you just feel awful that you didn't pick the right covenant. And that maybe your only option at that point is to re-roll your character to get that covenant. And I know exactly how bad it felt coming back from the MDI, knowing the mountain I was going to have to climb to get versatile gear. And I'm terrified that the Shadowlands is just going to be that a lot. That we'll have a series of that. Like people are going to find out like, oh dude, Kyrion's super good for this. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna pick up Kyrion. And then people are like, oh no, actually Ventyr's amazing for this. And you're like, oh god, dude, I already switched from Ventyr one time. This character's dead. I have to re-roll it. So the dungeons themselves I think look pretty good. It's like all the systems that go around it right now that are very scary.
Yeah, you're the first to bring that up, I think, JB. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. And your general thoughts?
I like the dungeons. Some dungeons have some pacing issues. Maybe the trash, like maybe we need to kill more trash so we don't end up skipping half the dungeons. But other than that, they have interesting mechanics. A lot of it is better telegraphed than in current expansion. Like there's, let's say, Freehold Enforcer backhands. They are as big as you and they one-shot you and you barely see where they're going. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of frontals, for example, are much better telegraphed this time around, which is really good. And bosses are way more interesting this expansion, I want to say.
You got a favorite?
So, that's difficult. Honestly, I really like the last boss in Plaguefall.
There's some controversy here amongst the rest of the team on that boss. Not big fans of that one. Especially on Mythic Plus, those tentacles are pretty rapid. I've seen some very good players caught out with those, including myself.
Those tentacles are currently also bugged that the animation goes both ways at the same time, and it gets very, very confusing unless you instantly know where to go, and you're not going to be safe. You're not going to find a safe spot if you don't know where it is instantly.
Well, that's true. Robin, who is back. Overall thoughts on the dungeons you've done so far? Before we take a few questions, big mix of questions actually come in here. Your overall thoughts on the dungeons so far? Anything you'd like to see developed over the remaining beta, or things that you're big thumbs up?
I have to say that the bosses are looking interesting. I think they'll need a lot of tuning, but the general idea of the bosses I really like. And if they get the tuning right, I think it might be some really, really good fights. And then once again, like Anna brought up, a lot of trash, required trash count in a lot of dungeons are really weird. And it's something they have to look into a bit. For example, in Necrotic Wake, you play 52% of the trash after the second boss, and nothing is skippable. So you basically just have to breath run to the second boss because you're just gonna overcount, and you need to clear the first room for the boss, which is kind of bring a CR or you're not gonna time the key. And then what we brought this up earlier as well in Plaguefall is kind of like Toldagor 2.0 in some parts of the dungeon where you just kill everything with barrels, and it's something people have been disliking for a very long time. You don't feel like you're playing the game. The game kind of plays itself for you. But apart from that, I really like the dungeons, and I think the layouts are really they look really good in a lot of dungeons. And yeah, the boss fights look way better than in BFA so far.
Overall, really positive from all of you, which is great to see. Like a couple of worries here and there, but generally speaking, not too bad. Would love to have seen, or what I'm taking away from this is love to have seen a little bit more affix effort gone in general. Still the same issues that perhaps we've had for 2 expansions at this point are still pretty much present in the Shadowlands, and nothing really being done to address those as far as you guys are concerned. If I'm wrong, please point out here. But generally speaking, dungeon layouts overall seem pretty good. No noticeable problems, even with the current affix system. Some little affix changes here and there, and Prideful might be really interesting once we actually get to test it and play it as the new seasonal affix. A couple of questions that guys have been putting in. We've had a big active chat here, spamming stuff for you guys. I was going to throw this to you now, actually, because you brought it up earlier. Is having dead weeks really that bad? Because it avoids burnout in that you're not always on a push cycle. How do you respond to that one?
I don't think having worse weeks is an issue where you can relax. It's mainly the fact that you have these really, really bad weeks where you don't even want to play the game. If it's just a worse week, but you would still enjoy to play the game, and you wouldn't just log on because you had to do your weekly, it would be more okay, in my opinion, because you could still play the game, maybe play your ults, you still enjoy playing the game, it's still fun and all that, but you might not be able to do the highest keys. But when you get hit with this, bolstering explosive, and you're sitting in the queue, and you're like, okay, we need either a demon hunter, we need a rogue, and you're just gonna be in the group to kill explosives. And these people, they don't even want to join the group because they're like, oh shit, is it really me who has to do this? It's so yeah. To answer that question, I don't think worse weeks are bad. It's just that they still have to feel fun to play.
No, that's
I
fair.
think the discrepancy between the weeks needs to be lowered. That's the because there's some really bad weeks, like this one.
Yeah, I think it's more a case of it's not a pendulum swing from one way to the other. You're not saying dead weeks is probably not ideal, but the fact is we don't want it to be a dead week. Some weeks can be better than others, and that's always going to be happen. What you don't want is a week you don't actually even want to play. And that the dungeon is just like, I mean, I'm sure there are many people who are watching right now who've opened that chest, they've got that key, and they've gone, because it's the key is practically useless. No one's going to want to run it, and you end up in that scenario. That's what to avoid. Not getting rid of all negatives, but having a more, a shorter delta between best and still pretty good. To encourage people to play. I've got to throw this at JB because this is something he's been talking about for about, if I check my watch here, 5 years. The Mythic Plus cache. We've seen several changes happening to that. I'm not sure if you're aware of it actually, but they are now going to get choices of loot. And it is data mined though. We should very much reiterate that. Your thoughts on gearing via Mythic Plus, because I know in private we've had many conversations about you having to jump in raids to get some gear and all that kind of stuff. Your thoughts on the actual loot system of dungeons going forwards into Shadowlands?
Yeah, so I think having a bigger selection of if your chest opens and there's 5 things that you can pick among, and you only get to pick one, but you get to select among 5 things. It addresses, I feel like, one of the biggest disparities between Mythic Plus and raiding that has existed. Obviously, I've been vocal about the fact that, when raiding had 5 more eye levels or 10 more eye levels than Mythic Plus, that didn't make me particularly happy. But I feel like the single biggest thing that's been a problem with raiding versus Mythic Plus is the fact that the best loot you get from Mythic Plus is from your cache, and you can't trade that. No one can give you their cache loot. You can't give your cache loot to anybody else. Whereas in raiding, anything that drops, there are 19 other people in the group that you can all trade among each other. So a lot of times in a raid, Azerite gets distributed very quickly because you get even if you don't receive it yourself in a particular week, after somebody gets it the first time, unless they're holding on to it to scrap it for residuum or something, you get diffusion of Azerite within the raid very quickly, and people can trade it to each other, and you a lot of times people are done with their Azerite from raid within like a month or something, and you don't get that same opportunity from Mythic Plus. You don't get to trade your best loot with other people now. And the reason why trading is important is because it offers a much wider selection of loot. You can get that gear exchange. You can get the thing you need. If you don't get it yourself, you can get it from somebody else. Now you can get that from your cache potentially, where if 5 things come from your cache, you could say like, okay, I really needed a weapon this week. And so I'm going to select the weapon this time. And then next week is like, I really need boots. Okay, cool. Boots drop. I'm going to take boots. The way that Mythic Plus loot has worked up till now, it has been very scattershot. I think I've gone entire seasons without getting a weapon from my cache, which is the biggest problem. The biggest problem for Mythic Plus is getting like high level weapons. They're so difficult to get. I think the single, like a lot of times you have like these trading card games where people will draw, the magical card from the pack that's worth, $10,000 and stuff. Right now, what that is on live, that is a 475 Getty. You like the meleeers that need 2-handers, dude, they post about it on Twitter. Exactly when any melee DPSer gets their Getty because they post about it on Twitter instantly. They screenshot it, they post it, they complain about whatever corruption landed on it, but they're like, I got my 475 Getty, dude. I did it. It's mine. I've achieved, the pinnacle of melee DPS. And it's so hard to do that as a Mythic Pluser to get those weapons. And so I feel like expanding the loot table, giving more options will do a lot to help with some of the Mythic Plus problems when it comes to loot.
And I would like to throw in here, because one of the questions I had about this new system, and maybe anybody can weigh in on this. Everybody else on the board, I mean, you're raiding now as well, JB. I think you came back in BFA to doing some raiding, if I remember last time we spoke. But everybody else here is a Mythic Raider and a Mythic Pluser. So that loot question doesn't come up. So this is more for the guys who gear purely from Mythic Dungeons. Is one, will it pull from the raid table if you do a couple of raiding things, or is it all just going to be Mythic Dungeon loot? I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Is if you're purely a Mythic Pluser, often there are things in the raid that you really want. Would you like to see that expanded into the cache? Now you have more of a choice system, so you are getting 3 times. If you only did Mythic Plus, you're getting 3 times the choices. Would you like to see that include other loot tables as well to try and accommodate that, or are you still thinking it's decent? If I need a raid trinket, okay, I have to go and raid and get it.
I would assume it's gonna like pick from, if you do the conquest cap, it's gonna pick like PvP items, and if you do M+, it's going to pick from M+. And I think that's how it should be. Like, it's going to be nice having... But, I mean, it's going to be harder for the only M+ers, right, to get, like, raid loot.
I agree with you, Dofem. I don't think you should be able to get...
Yeah,
I should not be able to get highest item level PvP trinket from doing M+. And I should not be able to get a raid trinket from doing PvP and stuff like that. I think different parts of the game should reward you with different parts of loot. And if you want to have that loot, you need to specifically target that loot in some ways.
I agree.
Motivation seems to be a big factor from a lot more of the guys who don't push high keys. And one of the questions maybe to you, Ander, and this is actually open to all of you after Ander's response, is what could Blizzard do to encourage more people to take part in Myth Plus? So I would put that into context as everybody here finds it quite easy to get into a Mythic Plus, right? We're not intimidated by doing it. But timers and those kind of things really off-putting to a lot of people. They feel very stressed in that environment. Is there anything that you think Blizzard could actively do to encourage people to get into that? And perhaps they have done, coming off the back of the Mythic Plus cache, offering more choices if they simply do more.
Maybe more seasonal rewards, like PvP offers, for example, with titles, mounts, transmogs and stuff like that per M+ season. That would maybe like... As soon as people start getting into M+, they're not going to bother as much about a timer. Keys are going to deplete, it's going to happen, no hard feelings, And as soon as you start doing a bit more keys, you're not going to worry about stuff like that. That's whatever. And if there's more rewards, even if it's only cosmetic rewards, I think more people would play it, because why not? I mean, having an extra mount is pretty cool,
I guess expanding on that then to the other 3, do you guys feel unrewarded for what you do in Mythic Plus when you're pushing high keys? Do you think it's a kind of ignored part because they're saying, well, it's only a few of you that do it? No titles like we see in PvP. No special armor sets. Nothing like that.
Do you know how you can tell that somebody does high keys on live?
Hit me.
You can't.
It's a trick question. You can't. There's nothing in this fucking game that tells you that somebody does high keys. Unless you have the Raider.io add-on, nobody has a single fucking idea what kind of keys you push. Like, unless they go check, unless they have an add-on downloaded or they check a website, they have no idea. When you have somebody that is done, like Mythic Jaina, they ride around on their water elemental mount. You know, when somebody did Argus, they ran around on their dorky-looking two-headed thing. When you have PvPers, they walk around with their titles and their mounts and their special colored transmog. When I do high level Mythic Plus, literally nothing happens. It's the same stupid looking transmog that you get from a Mythic Zero. None of it changed throughout this, like throughout the expansion. They didn't add anything cool. There are no titles. There are dungeon mounts, but it's not from doing high level Mythic Plus. It's just doing any mythic dungeon has a chance to drop some of these mounts. So yeah, adding that kind of stuff. I mean, like when people sell raid loot, like when you bring in buyers for raid stuff, for gold, obviously nobody's doing anything for money here. When you sell stuff for gold, what is the big ticket item from any raid? It's not, I mean, maybe there might be like one trinket or something that's like god tier for your class. Maybe you're selling your font to a mage or something, but by and large, the big ticket items, the things that sell for the most amount of gold, it's the mount, dude. Like people are like, you know, we got a buyer specifically for the mount. He doesn't care about any of the loot or anything else. He just wants the mount. And it's that kind of stuff that you need things in the game that demonstrate that like you are doing cool stuff. And that is the cosmetics. Like that is the titles, the mounts, the transmog. And Mythic Plus has never had any of that. And I feel like it doesn't even have to be. I mean, literally, you see the difference between Mythic loot and PvP loot. It's just recoloring. That is all that it is like, it's the armor and they just change the color. It would be so easy to just take one of those pieces and make it blue and call it the Mythic Plus chest piece. And like, that's it. That's all we're asking for is like, just literally that. And maybe throw us one mount, you know, maybe add like one Mythic Plus mount.
I think we got a mount this time, right?
Expansion.
There's a mount this time. You are getting a mount.
Okay.
Calm down.
We had a mount.
Keystone Master had a mount for all 15s, yeah.
Okay. So, you know, the mount's good. Mount's good, but it's still, you know, like I'm not trying to gatekeep here, but like 15 keys feels slightly different than like Mythic Jaina. Doing all 15s feels slightly different than you know, like it doesn't feel equivalent here. The effort doesn't feel equivalent. So I don't feel like it's quite as exclusive potentially as what you get from raiding or PvP, but I'm not necessarily going to quibble super hard on that. Maybe I'd like to see it be like 20s instead of 15s or whatever. I like the direction they're moving in here. I think they've recognized that, you know, people are looking for something in game that demonstrates your mastery of a particular end game content. So I do appreciate, you know, that their movement towards that. And to the extent that they want to throw more stuff at us, I am really cool with that and am here for it.
I mean, it'd be nice to see some in-game leaderboards, right? So you do get some sort of seasonal switch. We have seasonal affixes. They treat it as a seasonal thing, same as PvP. Like, I mean, I hesitate to say an internal Raider.io score or something like that, because that would really poke the bear, I think. But something online of, so, you know, battle group wide or something along those lines, weekly leaderboards. And that probably would, coming back off the first question, encourage more people to take part, right? If there was some armor, title, thing like that per season. So you could, you know, something prideful coming off the back of the prideful affix, for example. I think that would be a help, not just for you guys, but for the lower down as well.
Something I would have liked to see, I thought it was already going into BFA, which is kind of, I don't know if it would work or not, but it's kind of, you know, having some similar, like another game mode of dungeons, where it's kind of like MDI, and you would raise another team, and you could either like solo queue or you could queue with your friends, and you would have, you know, in-game leaderboards. You would get points, you know, racing against another team, you won, you got points, you lost points, you know. But people still want to do high keys, so I don't know how many game modes you can have of dungeons in game. But it would be really cool in my head to have some sort of competition in game like that.
Yeah, I agree. Always looking for some sort of encouragement for more people, because I do come across, certainly in what I do, is more people who are terrified of Mythic Plus. Silly as it might sound to some people, they find it, the whole idea of going into a timed environment where other people are relying on them is quite a horrific experience. Maybe that would help out, encourage more people to take part. class stacking is a problem. So I'd like to get your thoughts because the trickle down effect is very real. Community perception generally comes from what you lot are doing. People tune into the MDI, they tune into your streams, and they ask you the basic questions like, what talent setup should I take? What class is best? Etc. 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 How do you guys feel about that? Do you feel like it's that you guys maybe give an unfair representation, or is it just a natural consequence and there's really nothing you guys can do about it and it's just the way it goes? Maybe it's a Fem.
I feel like anyone who asks, "Hey, what's the best class?" Should just play for fun. Because if you are competitive enough to be needing to play the best class, you will know what the best class is. And if you don't, then just play for fun. Like, it's a game.
It's also the fact that people also ask because they want to do M+, and they don't know, and they might be a bit more casual. And then if they actually really enjoy playing Shaman, they are just gonna queue into the group finder and they're just gonna get declined because everyone in the group finder, they saw that JB with his friends, they did a +25 and they didn't have a shaman. So why would we bring a shaman to our group, even though in the end it wouldn't make a difference in the key level they were going at? Because it's people think like they look at classes and they think like, oh, we can't play shaman, but you can play shaman. It's just gonna be, it might not have the same throughput, but you can for sure play with shaman if you're not pushing the very, very, top end keys. But people are so, addicted to like play whatever the people pushing the highest keys or MDI are playing, and then they get so blinded just because we bring up some specific classes that nothing else is playable. And I think I don't know how to change that, but I think that's a lot of reason or times why people ask like, what was looking good for M+ this season? Because I want to be able to join groups. I don't want to be stuck here with my shaman and then play by myself, because it's kind of how it goes. I remember myself. I looked into the ladder and I searched for a weekly 15, and everyone was stating they either need a rogue or they need a prot warrior or they need a demon hunter. And if I would have queued up with my with my paladin and I would have linked my Red Raya account, I would just have gotten declined because they don't want a paladin, they want the warrior because that's what the top guys play, And I don't know how to get away from that, and I think it's very hard, and I don't think we ever will.
Is there?
But I think that's a lot of the time why people ask as well.
It's often brought up, certainly in regards, because this obviously kind of the highest tip of this is the MDI. We tune into the MDI, we see these very specific comps, usually mirror matches in a lot of cases. Is there something that can be done there to enhance class diversity, or even if Blizzard has to step in, or do you think that destroys that edge of it that you guys enjoy? If they were like, you can ban classes, or you can't have a multiple of the same class, is that some way of doing that just to give that impression, or is that just a no-go in terms of how it works at that top level?
That would just move the goalpost, though, wouldn't it? If we go from 3 BM hunters to a BM hunter, an Unholy Death Knight, and a Demon Hunter, it's going to be the same thing. Oh, why is it only these 3 classes and not something else? The delta between classes is way smaller than a lot of people expect it to be. But it's just the top-end players will always, even if it's just a 1% better, they will pick the better thing because it is that 1% better. But it's not required in basically anything that isn't the super, super top-end.
Well, I would say, so I think there's a few things that affect the meta. I mean, obviously, one of them is the fact that when you're picking a group, why wouldn't you pick? Like when you have this many options when there's a looking for group system, and you can literally go through and see, put your group up, and now I get to pick among 10 DPSers. Like, why would I pick the sub? Like, why would I if it's between like a fire mage or an enhanced shaman? Why would I pick the enhanced shaman? Like, when I get to make that selection, why would I do that? I feel like other games don't necessarily have the same problem. Like you look at MOBAs, for instance, which like WoW gets compared to a lot in terms of like having a meta of things that you pick. Like one of the things in those games is that nobody has to like pre-pick their character before you make the group. You like everyone jumps into a group together, then you pick. Like you start the game, then you pick, then people can yell at you for what you pick, but they couldn't exclude you from their group beforehand. Whereas with the looking for group tool, they can just look at what you've picked and why would you pick the substandard class. Secondly, I think people, even if it's like we could do a high key with a shaman, I think there's something about the meta itself that's like, if you're playing Shaman, there's this, it's sort of like, if you're a guy that plays a Shaman, either you don't care about doing Mythic Plus, or else you would have re-rolled to a class that was better, or you don't know enough to re-roll to, like, basically the assumption is like, if you really cared about Mythic Plus, you wouldn't be playing Shaman, so why am I going to invite you to my group? Which isn't necessarily true. There are a lot of guys out there that play Shaman that are very good at Mythic Plus, and they don't see a reason to re-roll. They don't need to re-roll. But that's if when you invite random people to your group when you don't know this guy from Adam, like, why would I pick the guy that plays Shaman? If he's playing Shaman, he's either ignorant or too lazy to re-roll, and I'm not going to play with a guy that doesn't, care as much about it as I do. I feel like one way you could address this in the LFG system would be to mask people's classes in the LFG system. If you like that, maybe there's a way, I literally, this came into my head like 2 minutes ago. You would maybe do something where it's like, you don't queue up as a class, you queue up as a role. You say like, I have a 479 DPS class. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what I am. Like maybe it says like I'm a melee DPSer, or I'm a range DPSer, or I'm a healer, or I'm a tank. But I'm not going to tell you which of those things I am.
Sounds horrible.
You just have to pick me. And then I'm going to show up and be like, surprise, I'm a ret paladin. And you're going to be like, oh, goddamn. But by that point, it's too late.
Did you just
but
that's just it. Once you form the group, if you kick anyone from it, it gives you the debuff that makes you not able to like join in a dungeon or something. So if you kick this guy, you're locked out of a dungeon for 20 minutes. So it's easier to just take the ret paladin and fail the dungeon than it is to kick him and wait and get somebody new. But I feel like the fact that people's classes are known at the outset is basically the crux of the problem, because somebody can discriminate from just that information, just from the class that you play. Somebody can say like, I don't want to play with you because you play that class. And then that like from that point forward, there is no way to solve that problem. Once they know that you play a non-meta class, it's already tainted.
Okay, that comes into the game. Remember this moment that it's his fault. He did this to us, and you know it when that class turns up. You're like, oh.
I do this for the guys that play off meta classes. Like some guys out there, they just want to be a sub rogue, and they don't care that their class has been dead since Zool. They just they love role playing the stealthy guy, and they want to use all of the cool stuff that sub rogue. I don't even know what's in the sub rogue kit. It's been like 3 years since I played with one. But I do feel bad that there are these guys that get excluded, and everyone's got their story about how I tried to queue into a 15 and I was playing my like Destro lock and nobody wanted to bring me, even though I was super good, super geared, and so it is to some extent a problem. And you do feel kind of responsible for perpetuating it as a high level player, because and the problem is we meme. We're as streamers, we meme and we make jokes, and we don't necessarily appreciate that even when we're joking, that still carries weight. When somebody asks me like, hey, I play a shaman, should I do Mythic Plus? I'm like, no, you should absolutely not do Mythic Plus as a shaman. That's disgusting. And like, I'm kidding. Obviously you could do Mythic Plus as a shaman, but like that's, you say something jokey like that, and then people hear that enough, and then it just becomes like ingrained into people. And even though you're kidding, you have perpetuated that sort of toxicity, not necessarily intentionally, but that's now how people like shaman, LOL. You can't even talk about it without people. If I say if we're having a Mythic Plus discussion and I say shaman, you laugh. Like that is the point we're at now. And there's really, I don't know how you fix that.
Well, here's an idea. This is actually not mine. Ketsuki from Wowhead has actually come up with this, but I'm forming a thought. What if, like, I, for instance, offered you guys a cash prize tournament of off-meta M+ tournament, an MDI off-meta classes only, where we could actually see that the difference isn't that large. It's not that big of a deal. I'm just forming this idea literally right now, so it might come to nothing, but something along those lines where we said, hey, you know what, we'll throw some money at you guys, but let's show the community that the difference isn't that large.
Well, legit, when I don't often do viewer keys on my stream, but when I do viewer keys, I have a concept called the Misfit Toys group, and when I do viewer keys, I only invite people that play off meta classes. So I'll make an entire group with like the prop paladin and the shadow priest and the arcane mage, and like if your spec is represented well in Mythic Plus, you're not invited to the group. Like screw you, go find a group. You can queue to any group in the system right now and get into it. Go play with them. I'm bringing the people that can't get into other groups because I want to demonstrate on stream that in fact, in some ways, when you're pugging, I actually kind of like getting like feral druids or enhanced shamans, because if you're a guy playing that class, you're probably really fucking good at it. Like the guys that play those classes a lot of times are the ones that like they are confident. They haven't re-rolled because they really like that class and they're good at it and they're knowledgeable. And you get that guy in here that's like, watch this shit. I'm going to show everyone exactly how good, the sub rogues are. And those guys pump and you're like, hell yeah. And I like making those types of groups that give guys an opportunity to demonstrate the utility that their class has that you don't often get to see on stream. And you get to see the damage and you get those cool moments. Like I remember the first time I brought a Shadow Priest in one of these groups, they were doing what the hell is the thing when they shoot all the missiles. I'd never grouped with a Shadow Priest in BFA at that point. And I was like, that's so fucking cool. Like, what even is that? Like, yeah. And I haven't played with a Shadow Priest, I don't think, since, but it was super cool.
Terrible story. Wow, you're cool. Now go away.
So yeah, I mean, I do. In those times, I do like to give an opportunity for people to showcase what those classes can do. But admittedly, it doesn't happen often.
Okay, I have one more question for the community before we wrap up, gents, and it's on the lines of the back of this. I'm going to throw this over to now. Is all the problems we've discussed just at the end here, which is obviously something Blizzard is desperately trying to tackle. I had an interview with Ian where he brought this exact issue. That they are working very hard to fix this, and they think the Covenants is a route of getting that done, where people will have more options and less exclusivity. How many of these problems that we've talked about now is a complete community fabrication, and it's entirely on the players, or is it down to Blizz? What's the ratio? Is there something that they should be doing, like they're interceding this time, because they do feel like they have some responsibility, obviously, or is it just a community thing and it's never going away?
Are we talking Covenants now?
No, we're talking about excluding people from dungeons, particularly those who queue through the system, right? They don't have their friends. Like if Gingy wants to come on his shaman, you don't care, right? If he wants to get a weekly dungeon, whatever it might be. But for the guys who use the queuing system, how much of that is a community problem, and how much of that is down to Blizzard themselves?
I'd say it's so here's the thing: no matter how well Blizzard balanced. It could be Covenants, classes, or anything. We are still, for example, in MDI, gonna play 3 of the same class, because like we brought up earlier, that class is 1% better than the other class. So what's the point of bringing something worse? Even though it's very, very minor, that class is still better, and we're gonna be 2 seconds faster with this class, and it's still gonna be the same thing, no matter how well you try to balance it. That is always going to be something that's best. It's the same in every game. There's always a best weapon in CSGO. It's always, I don't play Dota a lot, but it's always like some carry that's the best, and then it gets nerfed, and then someone else becomes best, and that's what people play or ban and whatever. It's the same in WoW, but we don't have this banning phase, of course. And people get so locked onto this one particular class that they just get blinded, and they don't want to invite anything else. Just like JB said, you can invite a Demon Hunter who's not even good at the game, but people see a Demon Hunter and they're like, oh, we need a Demon Hunter. But then you could have invited a Shaman, and you would have had a Shadow Priest or a Feral Druid or anything, and you would have had a better result, just because that player is actually, he wants to perform in the key, and it doesn't just reroll to something that's good. So I'd say in the end, it is a community. I wouldn't call it a failure, but it's, it is mainly on the community to, realize that just because some people play this class, it doesn't make everything else completely, irrelevant and can't be played. How to fix this? I don't know. I'm just like JB. When I do my viewer keys, I like to bring in a Shadow Priest, and I sometimes I bring in 3 Shadow Priests and I let them, raise damage against each other, and we see who wins. But for the overall picture, I don't know how you would balance this, because I feel like it's always going to be there. It's the same in every game. People see someone pick something that's not, the most popular class, and they're going to be like, what the fuck are you doing, bro? Pick the others, pick the good stuff, dude. Don't pick this.
That's fair.
I mean,
sentiment shared.
I don't think, the thing is, I think that it's natural to be like, well, it's a community, it's the community's problem, because they, you could, if the community was better about it, they could figure out a way to solve this. But in my mind, this is an issue. Blizzard doesn't want the game for every class to be homogenous. They don't want every class to have the same stuff. And to the extent that you start differentiating classes, you start adding unique things, it's more and more ways that players can discriminate. Without knowing the person playing the class, it's more and more things that you can look at and say, like, it's more opportunities to say, like, that's not the ideal thing. That's not the ideal thing. That's not the ideal thing. And if it's not, it's one thing when it's just your class, but then when you start adding covenants, now it's class and covenant. Now there's two things I can look at. And if it's not class and covenant, then, well, for the sake of this argument, like, the covenants would be the thing that's like, when you add a covenant that gives you, it's not just cosmetic, it's new abilities. It's one more thing that the community can use. And that's the thing, is like, why should the community be policing itself in this regard? If I'm putting a group together, at the end of the day, my goal is to time the key. Like, I want to get this key done. I'm not here to include, it's not my job as the guy making the key to, like, include everyone in the community and to make everyone feel good about the game and to make everyone's $15 a month, good for them. It's like, I'm here to get my key done. I'm going to put the group together that gives me the best chance of doing that. I'm going to pick the guys that I think give me the best shot. And unless I actually know the guys that I'm playing with, there's nothing, if I'm looking at a demon hunter and a shaman, the only thing I know about these two guys is that one of them plays demon hunter, one of them plays shaman. And if that's the only thing that I have to inform my decision, I'm going to go with the demon hunter 100 times out of 100. Why wouldn't I go with the demon hunter in that case? And there's nothing about the looking for group system other than, like, eye level. There's nothing about the looking for group system that gives me any other information to work with. So this is the thing. I'm always, and the community always should, like, that's the thing. You always should pick the demon hunter. If your goal is to time the key, it is always the right decision to pick the demon hunter. So the only way to fix it is to either give players more information, and I don't know what that information would be, but either you have to have more information to discern between who you're going to select, or you have to make the decision between those two classes less meaningful, which means making the classes less distinct, which a lot of people don't want. I mean, that's part of the allure of an RPG, is to have, the class uniqueness, bring different things to a keys. But in every instance, if you make things unique, one of them is going to be better. And if the only information you have is that one class has this ability and another class has this other ability that's better, you should always pick the class with the better ability.
For sure. I mean, I agree completely. It's usually people who are putting, at least in the testing we've done, is a very selfish experience. You're looking to get your key done. That's it. When you're doing that, you're not out to, for the most part, you're out to get your key done as effectively, as quickly as possible, ideally get some loot, and be on your merry way. So that is exactly why that system happens. And we've met I think we all here probably have met the guys at Rated.io who are working to try and make it better. That's their goal, to provide that extra information, and maybe that is a route of actually encouraging different classes in. So like Now said earlier, if he was to queue on his shaman, but he linked his Rated.io, he probably would have, there's a decent chance there. Vice versa, if he doesn't do that, there's no way of getting in. It's that bit of extra information that maybe is what's going to push this forward. Any comments to add there from Ander or Fem on that subject?
Yeah, and I agree with JB for a lot of the points. Like, people are always striving to increase their own odds of success, which is obviously what they're there for. Like, they're not there to entertain someone else, they're there to entertain themselves, and timing a key is normally more entertaining than depleting it, obviously. And it's, on one hand, like, you could say it is a community issue that no one gives anyone any benefit of the doubt, but on the other hand, like, what can you do about it? I think it's impossible to fix this as long as we didn't just have one class that does the same thing, everyone does the same thing. Like, let's say I invite a demon hunter. I know what a demon hunter does. Let's say I invite a shadow priest. I have no idea how I'm supposed to pull around a shadow priest. I don't know how they do damage. I don't know what kind of CC they have. I don't know anything about them, really, because they're very underplayed and they're bad. It's really hard.
Any final words, Fem?
No, I think they said all the stuff that I agree with, actually.
That's fair.
I don't know why people are so, like, they really want to time the keys. I love the depleting, man.
Yeah, depleting is more fun most of the time.
I think that's okay if you only deplete 1 in 1,000 keys at some crazy level. For the guys who get time to do maybe 1 M+, maybe that's not exactly the same story for those guys, right? It'd be something else. But that does bring us to the end of our Shadowlands dungeon talk. I really want to give big shout outs to these players for coming out today. They've been playing so much beta in order to check out these dungeons for you guys, providing feedback. I'm sure every single person here has reported the death checkpoints. We didn't talk about it here, but they are a bit wacky at the moment in those dungeons. You die at the end, you kind of start from the beginning. And all the questions from our chat. So to now, JB, Fem, and Ander, thank you for being here, and thank you for everybody to contribute. It's been a pleasure, and maybe we'll talk again once we have them all out. Okay?
Can I just bring one last thing up? I
Always.
didn't get to touch it, and it's that I would love to see gear swapping come back to M+. Like mainly now in Legion, we had a lot of legendaries you could swap in between, and it was so much fun to try and min-max between bosses and trash. Going into Shadowlands, we're getting legendaries back, and I feel like if Blizzard wants to see the legendaries being played, they should really implement gear swapping again. Because you would always, if it was no gear swapping, it would always be with the best choice overall in the dungeon. But for example, as a prot pal, I have this helm, which, when I use a Vengeance Shield, there's a 50% chance it's going to reset the cooldown, but it's not really that great on the bosses. But since it's so good on, trash, I'm always going to play with this. But if they, brought gear swapping back, it would be so many cases where we just play these, really neat and situational legendaries to, enhance your gameplay, and it's really fun, even though it's a bit more min-maxing. I'd really love to see it come back for Shadowlands.
I agree.
Definitely, big agree.
JB?
I'll be honest, I kind of got lazy in BFA. It's sort of nice to just go in there with one. And the problem is that, I hear this and I think of gear swapping and I think of corruption at the same time. And I imagine a world with gear swapping and corruption. And
but that's the thing. In BFA, you didn't really need to gear swap because you didn't have, even if you had gear swapping, let's say prior to corruption, you wouldn't really swap your gear. What would you change? Maybe one trinket, one boss. But when you have all these legendaries and stuff, it adds, another layer of min-maxing, which for me is really fun. It might not, if you're just looking through plus 15, you're not really,
I mean, I could have imagined a world where you swapped Azerite around every pull. Like, ooh, I'm going to put on my AOE Azerite.
Just limit the amount of swaps you have in a dungeon to 3.
Oh no.
I think that is going to be a controversial point across the board.
Yeah.
Especially with where do we stop? Is it Legos? Is it Soulbinds? Is it Conduits? Do we have various loadouts that are swapping? Because, of course, the Shadowlands is bringing many options with these systems. I would love to revisit this in the future once we have all the Mythic Plus and the seasonal affix to see if our thoughts have changed or anything like that. But that seems to be a little while off. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you again, guys, for giving us your time. Bye-bye.